Who is the best cryptid? You might say Bigfoot, as he is the most popular, or maybe you'd say the Wendigo, or even possibly Michigan's Dogman. But the only true answer, and hopefully you said this, is the Mothman. Mothman is definitely one of the big three in the cryptids community, and number one in my heart. So when they put my boy in Fallout, I was ecstatic. But with Fallout comes a twist on the real world, usually through mutations and experiments, but how would they adapt to an otherworldly being? Well, lucky for you, in this video I will cover just how they adapted Mothman into the Wastes. So let's start with Mothman's real-world appearance and story. Mothman is usually depicted as being humanoid, about 7 feet tall and muscular, as well as having large wings and the most noticeable feature, their glowing red eyes. Other sightings report Mothman to look like a large bird or owl, but still with the glowing red eyes. Mothman was first seen on November 15th, 1966, by a group of 4 driving on Route 62 near the TNT area, just outside Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Roger and Linda Scarberry and Stephen Mary Mallette claimed to see a tall figure on the side of the road, with its eyes glowing in the headlights. Frightened, Roger, who was driving, sped away towards Point Pleasant, but the creature would take flight and follow their car at high speeds while screeching. It did not give up on the chase until the car had reached town. The next day, their story was published in Point Pleasant Registry. This led to an influx of reports from other locals and their own experiences with the Mothman. All of this would lead up to December 15th, 1967, and the collapse of the Silver Bridge, killing 46 people, 2 of which were never found. Shortly before the bridge's collapse, people claimed to have seen Mothman either flying in the area or perched on the bridge, which has led to one of 2 theories. Either that he is a harbinger of doom and caused the collapse, or was able to see the future and was attempting to warn locals of the imminent danger. Either way, after the collapse, sightings of Mothman slowed down, with a few sightings here and there up till today. One being that supposedly someone claimed to see Mothman a few weeks before 9/11. I have no idea if this actually happened, but I've heard it so many times online to where I just had to include it. These days though, Mothman is beloved by locals and people around the world, with his own festival being held for him every year in Point Pleasant, which brought in $2 million in 2022. So how does this compare to him in Fallout? Let's start with his appearance. In-game, Mothman to me looks like a giant moth with some owl attributes, while still having their classic glowing eyes, this time around in many different colors. They also emit fog that flows down from their bodies and will appear from or disappear into clouds of the same fog. This fog is actually a neurotoxin, which is harmful and can also cause hallucinations. In terms of the story of Mothman, it is actually the same for the most part pre-war. A half moth, half man who lurked in Point Pleasant and thought to be a harbinger of doom. It differs in Fallout when a group begins to worship Mothman as a divine being and form the cult of Mothman. On October 22nd, 2077, the night before the Great War, the cult attempted to make contact with Mothman to seek any form of wisdom. One follower, Brother Charles, claimed that he saw Mothman out of the corner of his eye and heard whispers of terrible floods that would occur the next day. So, the cult would take to the rooftops the next day to both survive and show their faith to Mothman. The cult would survive the flood really being the Great War, by traveling to Lucky Hole Mine, which is quite far from Point Pleasant, so I guess they just ran really fast. In this cave, the cult would split into 2 groups. One group is known as the Enlightened, led by Brother Charles, now known as Wise Charles the Forewarned, who revere the Wise Mothman, the Mothman with purple eyes and supposedly the same one Charles had seen in his vision. The Enlightened would leave the cave before the other half of the cult, as well as leave West Virginia entirely. This other half of the cult would come to be known as followers of the Winged One, and would instead worship the Red-Eyed Mothmen, as they were seen as manifestations of the Holy Mothman. This difference in which Mothman to worship is presumably what led to the split in the cult. The followers stayed in the mines for a little longer until they too eventually emerged and set up settlements across West Virginia, until the Scorched Plague. When the plague was released on West Virginia, followers of the Winged One were either killed, infected, or fled. Once the Scorched vaccine began to be produced and distributed, the followers returned to their former settlements where they continued to worship Mothman and attack the player. The Enlightened also returned to West Virginia seasonally to hold the Mothman Equinox Ritual, an event you can attend where Wise Charles and other followers summon the Wise Mothman to gain wisdom, which really entails you getting high and doing all the work while they stand around. Now that we've covered the story of Mothman, I think it's time we can talk about the variants, or the different eye colors meanings. First is the purple-eyed Wise Mothman, which we know to be revered and not necessarily worshipped by the Enlightened, and is also the only non-hostile Mothman to the player. The followers, on the other hand, do not worship the Wise Mothman and denounce him and the Enlightened as a whole, referring to it as the Purple Liar.
When people say Mothman, I assume they're talking about the Holy Mothman, not that purple liar.
Orange-eyed Mothmen are either hatchlings or vengeful Mothmen and are not worshipped by either cult and are mentioned to possibly be the species in its natural uninfluenced form. Green-eyed Mothmen are Mothmen either exposed to high levels of radiation or infected with a scorched plague. These Mothmen are also not worshipped by either cult. Finally, the red-eyed Mothmen, or as they are called, holy Mothmen. These Mothmen are the ones worshipped by the followers and have been worshipping them since pre-war times. While it is not known what causes their eyes to become red, Mothmen are most commonly depicted with the red eyes. The enlightened do not recognize these Mothmen as holding any sort of significance and refer to them as the red-eyed pretenders. A few other things to mention about Mothman before the end of this video. In-game, they can only spawn at night, excluding world events like the equinox, and there are also 2 characters that claim to have dreams or nightmares caused by the Mothmen, which really might be visions. These characters being Beckett and brother Scarberry. Scarberry being a reference to Roger and Linda Scarberry, who were 2 of the 4 who had first encountered Mothman in real life. Now, I think that pretty much covers everything about the Mothman, or at least the more important things. Obviously, there are still minute things you could learn about these Mothmen, but I don't think a video of me reading every single piece of text and dialogue with the word Mothman in it would be very exciting, unless you really want me to do that. Anyway, thanks for watching. Consider subscribing and liking if you like this, and if you didn't like this, then don't give me a like. Next video I'll have out sooner than the gap between this one and my last video, so look out for that, and of course, have a lovely day.